Most wars are remembered for how long they lasted. Some wars stretch across decades, some consume entire generations and leave behind scars that never fully heal. But this war is remembered for something very different. It is remembered for how fast it ended. In 1991, the world prepared itself for another long and brutal conflict in the Middle East. Military analysts warned of a disaster. News channels spoke openly about a possible second Vietnam. Iraq possessed one of the largest armies on Earth. Over 1 million soldiers stood under arms. Thousands of tanks were dug into defensive positions. Miles of trenches and barriers cut across the desert. The Iraqi military had spent years preparing for a ground invasion. They believed they were ready. Most experts believed that removing Iraqi forces from Kuwait would require months of fighting. Some predicted tens of thousands of casualties. Others believed public opinion in the United States would collapse under the pressure. What happened instead stunned the world. Entire Iraqi divisions vanished in a matter of days. Not because they were slowly worn down, not because they were overwhelmed by superior numbers, but because they were outmaneuvered. They were confused, isolated, and psychologically broken before the decisive moment even arrived. This is the story of how deception, speed, and technology defeated raw numbers. This is the story of the left hook. By 1990, Iraq was under crushing economic pressure. 8 years of war with Iran had drained the nation dry. The Iran-Iraq War was one of the longest and bloodiest conflicts of the modern era. Millions of lives were disrupted. Hundreds of thousands were killed. When the fighting finally stopped in 1988, Iraq emerged militarily intact but financially broken. The country was drowning in debt. More than $80 billion were owed, much of it to neighboring Arab states. Interest payments alone threatened to cripple Iraq's economy. Rebuilding cities, repairing infrastructure, and stabilizing the population seemed nearly impossible under this burden. Saddam Hussein needed relief, but more than money, he needed leverage. To Iraq's south lay Kuwait, small in size, enormous in wealth. Kuwait possessed massive oil reserves and produced far more oil than Iraq could afford to sell cheaply. Low oil prices hurt Iraq badly, reducing the revenue Saddam desperately needed. Saddam accused Kuwait of stealing Iraqi oil through slant drilling, a technical accusation that was difficult to disprove quickly. He claimed Kuwaiti companies were drilling diagonally beneath the border and siphoning oil from Iraqi fields. At the same time, Saddam revived old historical arguments. He claimed Kuwait had once been part of Iraqi territory before colonial borders divided the region. Saddam also demanded that Kuwait and other Gulf states forgive Iraq's war debts. His argument was framed as sacrifice. Iraq, he said, had fought Iran not only for itself, but for the entire Arab world. It had stopped Iranian influence from spreading westward. It had acted as a shield. From Saddam's point of view, Iraq deserved compensation, not repayment demands. These claims, repeated again and again, formed the political narrative Saddam needed, a narrative that portrayed Iraq as the wronged party and Kuwait as an aggressor hiding behind wealth and foreign protection. Saddam believed he understood the United States. He believed he had studied American behavior carefully. He looked closely at the Vietnam War, a war where overwhelming firepower failed to deliver victory, a war where public opinion eventually forced withdrawal. He also remembered the 1933 bombing of the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, a single attack that killed hundreds and led to a rapid American exit from Lebanon. From these examples, Saddam reached a dangerous conclusion. He believed the United States lacked the patience for long, costly wars. He believed Americans would not tolerate heavy casualties far from home. In his mind, the strategy was simple. Move fast, take Kuwait quickly, restore oil production. Once the world adjusted to the new reality, economic interests would outweigh political outrage. Time, Saddam believed, was on his side. He was wrong. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi forces crossed into Kuwait. The invasion began in the early hours of the morning. Armored columns rolled across the border. Airborne units seized key infrastructure. Communication centers were captured almost immediately. Within 48 hours, organized resistance collapsed. Kuwait City fell. The ruling family fled into exile. The invasion triggered 3 global crises almost instantly. First, the economic shock. Iraq now controlled nearly 20% of the world's oil supply. Markets panicked, oil prices surged. Second, the strategic threat. Iraqi forces now stood dangerously close to Saudi Arabia. If Saudi oil fields were threatened, the consequences would be catastrophic. Third, the political crisis. A post-Cold War world had just witnessed borders erased by force. If Iraq succeeded, it would set a precedent with global consequences. Saudi Arabia feared it would be next. The request for protection came quickly. In response, a multinational coalition began deploying to the region. Forces arrived from the United States, Europe, and across the Arab world. It became the largest military buildup since World War II. Command of the operation was given to General Norman Schwarzkopf, a veteran of Vietnam, a commander shaped by hard lessons. Schwarzkopf immediately understood the problem. Iraqi forces outnumbered the coalition in troops, tanks, and artillery. Their defenses in Kuwait were deep and layered. A direct frontal assault would be slow, it would be bloody, and it would play to Iraqi strengths. Schwarzkopf rejected that approach. Instead, he studied Saddam Hussein himself, not just his army, but his mindset. Schwarzkopf saw a leader who relied on fear and rigid control, a commander who expected predictable behavior from his enemies. Saddam expected frontal attacks, gradual escalation, clear patterns. That expectation became his greatest weakness. If Saddam could be forced to focus on the wrong battlefield, the entire Iraqi defense system would unravel. The plan that emerged rested on four principles: deception, technology, speed, and psychological warfare. Iraqi commanders would be convinced the main attack would come from the south, along Kuwait's coastline. Coalition technology would allow forces to move with unmatched precision. The ground war would move faster than Iraqi command systems could respond, and Iraqi morale would be shattered before the decisive blow even landed. This plan became known as the left hook. Coalition forces openly rehearsed amphibious landings along the Persian Gulf. Media crews were invited. Cameras captured every move. News coverage focused almost entirely on a coming beach invasion. Headlines spoke of Marines preparing to storm the coast. Iraqi commanders reacted exactly as expected. Beaches were mined, artillery was repositioned, defensive lines thickened along the shoreline. But the real attack was never meant to come from the sea. Near the Kuwaiti border, coalition deception units created a ghost army. Fewer than 300 soldiers simulated the presence of more than 130,000 troops. Fake radio traffic filled the airwaves. Inflatable tanks and vehicles created convincing heat signatures. Smoke generators simulated mass troop movements. To Iraqi surveillance systems, it looked real. Psychological operations aircraft dropped hundreds of thousands of leaflets. They warned Iraqi soldiers of overwhelming force. They explained how to surrender safely. While Iraqi attention remained fixed on the illusion, the real coalition force moved silently. Under strict radio silence, nearly 300,000 troops traveled hundreds of miles west into empty desert. This massive armored movement went almost completely unnoticed. GPS technology made it possible. In a featureless landscape with no landmarks, coalition units navigated with precision. Speed and coordination were maintained across vast distances. By the time Iraqi commanders realized something was wrong, the maneuver was complete. Before ground forces moved, coalition air power reshaped the battlefield. Beginning January 17, 1991, aircraft struck Iraqi radar, air defenses, command centers, and supply lines. For 42 consecutive days and nights, Iraq was bombarded. Stealth aircraft penetrated heavily defended airspace. Cruise missiles struck with unprecedented accuracy. Communication networks collapsed. Units became isolated. Orders stopped arriving. On February 24, 1991, the left hook struck. As Iraqi forces waited in Kuwait, facing south, coalition armor surged from the west. Supply routes were cut, escape corridors were sealed. The 18th Airborne Corps blocked retreat paths deep inside Iraq. The A7th Corps and British forces destroyed Iraqi's elite Republican Guard units. Entire Iraqi divisions were bypassed, surrounded, and neutralized before they could respond. The ground war lasted just 4 days. Coalition forces destroyed approximately 3,300 Iraqi tanks, while losing only 31 of their own. Communication collapsed completely. Many Iraqi units surrendered without firing a single shot. Some soldiers surrendered to journalists unable even to locate coalition troops. The Iraqi military, once feared for its size, disintegrated. On February 28, 1991, a ceasefire was declared. Coalition forces stopped short of Baghdad. The decision was deliberate. The UN mandate was clear: liberate Kuwait, do not occupy Iraq. Advancing further would have fractured the coalition and turned victory into occupation. Saddam Hussein had prepared for the wrong war. He expected a slow conflict like Vietnam. Instead, he faced a military transformed by speed, deception, and technology. The left hook changed modern warfare forever. It proved that the smartest army, not the largest, would dominate the battlefield. And it showed that wars are often decided long before the first shot